a hybrid meeting. We're online and in person here. So with the cameras in this room, everything on your desk could be broadcast at some point. So keep that in mind if you're having papers on your desk. A recording of this will be made available afterwards. If a fire alarm sounds, please follow the officers who will escort us out of the building. And also we may have some people taking photos here tonight. So if you don't want to have your photos taken, please raise your hand now. Great. So thank you all for coming. And how many people do we have online, Charlie? 10 online as well as the people here. That's great. So just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Dr. Helen Cook. I'm a co-founder and director of the Resilience Web CIC. The Resilience Web is an online visualization of community groups in Cambridge, curated by the people who live here. Further, we have nearly a dozen webs across the UK, each specific to its place. These webs enable volunteers to find groups and for groups to find each other and to connect around issues that they're interested in. We also host events like these to connect people in person and to understand the issues around resilience. At one of these events at the Cambridge Room, I met Katie Thornborough. Katie and I started talking and wanted to look closely into resilience around a range of topics. And so this series was created. The Cambridge Room is a great space in the Grafton Centre. It's now reopened, and it's the voice of Cambridge citizens in policy issues in Cambridge. So these past 3 years have been the 3 warmest since 1850, and it's clear that we are headed into an increasingly uncertain future. With this series of events, we want to start a public conversation about adaptation and resilience to really understand the issues we're facing. Resilience often means bouncing back after a disaster, but more than this, we want to look at what can be done in advance to prevent disasters. How Resilient is Cambridge aims to understand the issues so we can anticipate what changes are coming and not to be surprised by them. We're doing this in a context where we know the needs of all people are not currently being met. It's not just future problems that are of concern. Cambridge is one of the most unequal cities in the UK, and for many, the disasters are already in progress. As we've heard in past weeks, resilience doesn't come from over-optimized and fragile systems. Bless you. Of course, it means effectively using our resources, and it also requires backups, stores, and alternate sources. Being resilient means being adaptable, valuing diversity, and tending to the marginal and the marginalized. Resilience is only possible through understanding the root causes and feedback loops of the systems we live in. The more ways we have of meeting a need, and the more ways we have of working together, the stronger we'll be as a community. We survive and thrive together, not, as some may think, as isolated individuals preparing for disaster on our own at home, but as a community that insists on a better future for all. The focus tonight is on understanding the issues, the risks, and challenges we face. This is a discussion of the issues, not of politics, and we aim to keep the focus on facts. We will have problems to solve, and we'll hear from our experts about them shortly. But I hope you will leave tonight with a better understanding of the issues, as gaining this knowledge is the first step towards thinking about solutions that work. Further, be encouraged by the fact that this many people and the folks online are here and care about this issue tonight. Now, just before we turn to the topic for tonight, communication, I'm going to explain our timing scheme. So Peter is managing our timer, which will be green to start, yellow when there's 1 minute remaining, and red when the time is up. So we have a fantastic panel of speakers who are speaking with us today. First up, and online, we have Laura Ellis, Head of Technology Forecasting from BBC R&D. So over to you,
Hello.
Laura.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
That's good. I'm seeing a thumb. That's fantastic. That's our first resilience challenge met. It's lovely to be with you. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but it's really good to be here and to be speaking on this topic of such huge importance, something that's very close to my heart. I'm going to share my screen and just see whether I can make sure that the deck is something you can see. So please just bear with me. If somebody could give me perhaps a thumbs up that they can see the deck that I have in front of me.
We can indeed.
Actually, oh, perfect, because you're so tiny, I can't even see a thumbs up. And please stop me when you need me to stop if I'm going over. I shall try to keep time, but I won't be able to see a red light, I'm afraid. So I'm going to start to advance the deck. Can you see a slide now with some army people carrying a dog and a man on a kind of a makeshift raft? Then we are away. Fantastic. So yes, thank you so much for the introduction. I work at BBC R&D. I've also spent 30 years in journalism, most of it local journalism, dealing with various elements of connecting in a crisis, as we've called it in the BBC for many, many years. And it was my name at one point that was on the BBC Connecting the Crisis website, where I used to spend a lot of my time, and I would do a lot of the liaison with Cabinet Office around where we might deploy our thinking around preparing for emergencies. Back in those days, just to share a quick anecdote, we used to talk about pandemic flu quite a lot, way, way before COVID. And the most serious thing we could think of at that point was that it might take people out of the office off sick for a few weeks at a time, and it might reduce the workforce, but we hadn't even started to sort of really think about the full scale of the horrors that then unfolded. Anyway, I'd like you to imagine, as you look at this picture of these military folk rescuing somebody, that it's midnight and that you're in the middle of one of the most beautiful towns in the Lake District. The wind is howling, and you've gone to bed feeling anxious, increasingly so as you listen to the rain hammering harder and harder. This is a real story. It comes from Storm Desmond in 2015. At 2 a.m, you switch on your radio and you're worried. You're thinking that maybe there's things you don't know about. Are you in danger that you perhaps are unaware of? But BBC Radio Cumbria is on air, and with its local programming, presenter, a local man worried about his own home, knows what it feels like to be worried. He knows the area, he knows the latest situation, he's using local references, and he knows where to reassure you, but also where to warn you, you're not alone anymore. It was an anecdote from an elderly lady living in one of the villages most hard hit by Storm Desmond in 2015. Really hit home with me about how important it was to play that part, not only in informing people about an emergency that was unfolding, but also reassuring them, keeping them company, and providing them with some two-way communication, the ability to ask questions, to phone in, to say this is happening, and to give information themselves. So we always knew, as we worked through the decades that I worked in local radio, how important it was for local radio to connect in a crisis and to be that two-way source of communication, companionship, and voice. But it was just a really good example, thinking back to that. And since then, we have had many, many more storms, many more floods, and many other events that have required a similar response. And although, and I'm sure you'll be only too aware of this, there has been some criticism of local radio recently in terms of the fact that we have made some cuts and we've not been able to deploy quite as many resources as we have in the past. We are still very much there, and we do have actually a legal obligation, well, certainly a regulatory obligation to be there and to be that presence that stays on air and has an obligation to stay on air. And we can talk about technical resilience in a minute. Here's a quote from the breakfast show presenter Mike Zeller, it was from the head of region, but he says the breakfast show presenter Mike Zeller's home was flooded and he had to be rescued by boat in the early hours, yet he was back on air that same day reporting on the situation. You cannot do any better, I think, in these situations, than having people who understand that locality that you're in, where the crisis is occurring, and care so much about it that they want to be immersing themselves in the response. We've put people into Gold and Silver Command. We've had various experimental ways of how we immerse ourselves in the emergency planning and reaction. Having those presenters who live and understand the area is absolutely key to that resilience response. Moving on, let's talk about COVID for a second. Imagine again, if you would, it's lockdown, and it's pretty much easy to do this because it's almost exactly 6 years ago that we entered that very odd time in our collective lives. Fear and anxiety and frustration were rife. And imagine trying to navigate those very scary circumstances without having English as a first language. Well, this was something that Radio Leicester very quickly started to grapple with. And whilst the local authorities were very busy putting out various communiques in various languages, Radio Leicester thought that the best thing it could do would be to run bulletins very regularly in Gujarati, which is spoken by 11.5% of the city's population. And so they began to do that. And this was incredibly helpful. And here's a quote from Vinod Gadyali from the Obi and Wigston Hindu community group. He said at the time that many people are not even aware of the lockdown, and it's probably because of the language barrier. So one of those things that we thought we could do at that particular point was to provide that capacity to seek out somebody who could read those bulletins, and then be the service that provided that to people so that they could regularly tune in, regularly catch up with what we all needed at that time, which was really reliable information about what to do and what was happening. I think it's really important to say that local radio isn't just there in those emergency times, and it's something that we've always tried to make very clear. So here's a good example: Make a Difference in Cambridgeshire. You may recognise some of these people and some of these stories. And I think one of the things that when I was talking to Katie before we arranged this meeting, that I thought was so important was that if you're going to have people turn to you in time of crisis, you need to be there in the good times. You need to be there building those relationships when people have stories to tell you that might not be about storms, destruction, or COVID. They might be about pandas. They might be about all kinds of things. And building that ongoing relationship is something that I think provides you with a fantastic basis for resilience when that time comes and when we need it most. Finally, I just wanted to touch a little bit on the technology side of things. I don't know if any of you in Cambridge or Cambridgeshire recognise the very old Radio Cambridge logo on the right-hand side of the screen, but I put it in as a treat for you in case you did. The more modern logo is the purple one in the middle of the screen. What you might see at the top of the screen is something called Vylor, and it's just one aspect of the technical underpinnings which the BBC has put in to try to make sure that local radio is resilient in those moments of crisis. Because if you imagine in those moments of crisis, it's quite often the very, very worst time to be expecting everything to go right in terms of your ability to broadcast. So we have backup. Vylor enables us to twin with other stations and to move our broadcasting to another station, whilst perhaps we still have people in the local area. It enables us to put our broadcasting wherever it needs to be to continue with it, whilst we make sure that the information flow continues to happen. We do have this very specific obligation to remain on air and to do our absolute best to make sure that in a situation, whatever it is, we are there providing that information. So we have things like generators, we have desktop planning exercises that take place quite regularly so that we can plan various situations and we can try them out and we can sort of game them a little bit so that we understand what might happen on any given occasion. Of course, it never quite happens as you think it's going to, but it gives us some thinking and some things to draw on. So this quote here comes from Connecting in a Crisis, our specific response to this kind of planning operation. And it says that as part of our Royal Charter Agreement, we invested our own broadcast resilience and business continuity planning to ensure we can continue to provide potentially life-saving information that local communities rely on in an emergency situation. I'm just going to end with a picture of, you may even know him, some of you, because Robert Thompson, who now leads the whole of BBC England, is very much a veteran of working in Cambridge and looking after the local teams in the east of England. And he's recently written a piece which was reflecting the BBC's charter process, which we're going through at the moment. And what he said really struck home with me because it just feels very much something that I feel deeply about local radio, especially now. And he says that when the world feels divided and headlines scream conflict, one thing that still unites us is our local community. So thank you for the opportunity to present this to you. I have thought a lot about local community in the last few days as I've put this deck together and had some thoughts about it. I think it is a really important part of what we do in terms of communication, and our local radio stations are not alone. There are independent radio stations, there are local newspapers, there are other media. I can really only speak on behalf of the BBC. I'd be very happy to take any questions or any thoughts, and we are always open to working with other people who care about things in this space and have responsibilities in this space, because it's something that we hold very dear and know is very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Great to hear from you. Next, we'll go on to Mike Banahan, who is presenting from Raynet.
Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me here. Wood, my first slide. Thanks very much, Charlie. Okay, my name is Mike Banahan. I'm here today kind of wearing two hats. So my first hat is as a volunteer for Ely Area Resilient Community, which is a voluntary group which is trying to help bring planning into place for Ely. And taking that hat off, and more relevant to my talk, is my Raynet hat. Raynet is a body which has been going in Cambridgeshire since the middle of the 1950s, and Raynet provides emergency communications in times when telephony and other systems have gone down. Now, strictly speaking, my talk today is given personally because what I'm going to talk about is not an official position of Raynet. So regrettably, I'll take off the Raynet hat, but what I'm talking about will be advised by experience gained in providing emergency communications and my own background in radio and television engineering, which goes back to the 1970s. Today, I'll be talking about end-to-end communications. The BBC are talking about broadcast communications, but here we're talking about people getting messages to each other and back again. So that's things like telephony, email, WhatsApp, messaging like that. So if I go on to my next slide, please, Charlie. Thanks very much. Nowadays, everything is digital. It used to be the case that voice communications were carried separately from the internet, which were carried separately from data. But over the years, that stuff has all been merged now, and it all goes, broadly speaking, down one big fat pipe. And if that pipe clogs up or the pipe breaks, you lose the lot of it. It's the case that when the GPO ran the telephone system, it was staffed by people who'd grown up during the Second World War, and their watchstone was reliability. I know I worked with those guys back when I was an apprentice in the middle 70s, and everything about the telephone system was reliability, reliability, reliability. You would walk into a telephone exchange and there'll be a small exchange with an enormous battery on the side, ranks and ranks of huge lead acid vats, which powered the telephone exchange. The telephone exchange used to power your phone as well. Back in the days when we had copper to the premises, surprisingly, your phone was actually powered from the telephone exchange. So even if everything else went down, the telephone still worked. Nowadays, this is all wrapped up into digital infrastructure. And the cartoon here from XKCD, which I recommend Googling XKCD because it's a source of endless amusement. This cartoon, people who aren't in the know will look at this and say, oh yes, well, that's very funny. That's exaggeration done for comic effect. You talk to people in the industry and they'll say this, but more so. This is the reality of it. The digital infrastructure that we have has been cobbled together out of a whole load of components that were not intended to be critical infrastructure. It's been cobbled together by exceptionally clever people, and they've cobbled it together very well, but cobbled together it is. And there's all kinds of surprising points of failure. I realize I'm on a fairly tight schedule, so I shan't go into a lot of this at depth. But I know, for example, Councillor Griffin here is familiar with BGP, which is one of the talking points I could have brought up. This famously runs the entire routing of the internet. That's how packets get from one place to another. This was designed famously on the back of 3 napkins in a conference, and mostly written by a guy from IBM and a guy from Cisco in their spare time. That gives you some idea of the kind of pedigree of our critical national infrastructure when it comes to digital. This point here, a project some random person in Nebraska has been thanklessly maintaining since 2003. That is no joke. If you want to go and have a look at the network time protocol, which is how time is spread all over the internet, that's exactly how NTP used to work until it was taken over when the irascible maintainer of it eventually retired. There are other surprising places where the infrastructure will fall over, where you would never have thought we would have dependency. Many of us are used now to using global positioning satellites, SatNav, technically known as GNSS, Global Nat, whatever it is. We use that to navigate with. The Royal Academy of Engineers did a study into the effects of this satellite navigation on the way that our economy works. And not only if this went away would logistics fall apart, because nobody nowadays carries paper maps and nobody could read one even if they had one. Astonishingly, huge parts of our infrastructure are utterly dependent on the timing signals. Satellite navigation works by sending incredibly precise timing signals down to the nanosecond, 10 to the minus 9 seconds. Light travels 30 centimeters in 10 to the minus 9 seconds, and that's how your phone knows where it is. The satellite says, I'm here at this time. When you get a signal from 4 or 5 of them, your phone does a complicated simultaneous equation and says, the only place I could be on the surface of the Earth where this timing could be true is if I'm here. So that's how your phone works out where it is. That timing has become all pervasive, so much so the government has now set up a task force to get this out of our system. But surprising things fall apart if somebody in Boulder, Colorado is told by the orange chap in the White House, turn it off. Because if he turns it off, not only do we lose our location information, we lose our timing. DAB radio stops working. DAB radio is completely dependent on highly precise timing signals. Much of the national grid's fault reporting is dependent on highly precise event reporting back to central office. And if those events come back with the wrong timestamps on them, the grid will shut down because it doesn't think it's in a safe condition. It is surprising where this stuff permeates. So our critical national infrastructure is highly dependent on stuff you might not expect. And without digital, everything falls apart. Surprising things fall apart. No card payments. Your supermarkets will empty because they are dependent on just-in-time delivery. They have no back house warehousing anymore. If they've got it, it's on the shelves. And when they run out, a truck arrives, all this stuff digitally reordered, the stuff goes back on the shelves. If this falls apart, stuff falls apart badly. Next slide, please, Charlie. So is our digital infrastructure reliable? Well, the thing is, it's been put together by a whole bunch of people who are paid by results, and they're paid for getting stuff to you. They're not paid for making it reliable. Now, I don't use that as a particular criticism. We are where we are. But these are not people who are rewarded for making it reliable. And it is, I believe, entirely capable of collapsing without being pushed. But this is the kind of thing that bad actors and people who don't like us are likely to try to infiltrate. And they're waiting. And when they don't like the look of us, they can go in there and they can give it a good hefty push as well. Now, we don't know how badly it's been infiltrated. The likelihood is it isn't terribly badly, because given the situation in Ukraine, it would have been given a good hard push a long time ago, and they seem to be muddling along. So we may be all right on the reliability of this important infrastructure, but it can still fail. In 2024 in Canada, there were some very bad wildfires. The fires burned through the 2 fiber optic cables, which supplied the entire Northwestern Territories in the Yukon. And they were utterly without communications until the fiber cables were repaired. There's a quote here from one of the first responders. Unless you have a Starlink, that's satellite internet, or a device like that, then you don't have any access to the outside world. You can't phone 911, no emergency calls. That's pretty serious. You can't call the police, can't call the health centre. You can't call if you see a fire. So there were real issues that creates inside small isolated communities. And I've already mentioned the point about phones nowadays moving away from copper to digital. If your phone is on the end of a fiber cable nowadays, then your router, if you want to be able to make emergency calls, let's say there's a power cut on your street, your router is going to need battery backup. A lot of people don't have that. And that brings me on to my next slide, please, Charlie, which is that all of this infrastructure is dependent on electricity. If there's no power, there's no telecommunications. Cell phones, internet, everything, the whole lot collapses the moment the power goes off, or within 1 to 2 hours, if you're one of the lucky people who lives within range of a cell phone base station that has actually got battery backup. And there aren't many of those. Over a wide area, the results of a long-term power outage are catastrophic. And this is not a word I like to use loosely, but it's horrible. There was an exercise done 3 years ago, which I was fortunate enough to participate in, called Exercise Mighty Oak. And this simulated a total loss of power in the UK for 72 hours. It's awful. You really, really, really don't want to be in that situation. How do we avoid that situation? Well, the UK's national grid, which is pretty reliable, was mostly built out in the 1960s. The average age of its power transformers is 63 years old. They have a design life of 35. So I leave you to draw your own conclusions from that. I'll skip a couple of points because we're short of time. If you want to read about the effects of this, there's a URL here, the Royal Academy of Engineering's report on living without electricity. You absolutely have to read that. That's a must read for anybody concerned about this stuff. Next slide, please, Charlie. So if there's no telecommunications, what can we do? We have to fall back on the old wartime point-to-point radio, which is still quite widely used actually within the UK. The emergency services have their own system called Airwave. This is allegedly resilient against power failures, and it may well work, although it's never actually been tested in real life. So the blue light services may have some coverage. They will lose coverage inside buildings, but they should be able to get coverage on main roads. Everyone else will have no telecommunications at all. The rest centres and emergency hubs, which are likely to be stood up by local authorities. My concern there is that word will get round that these things exist, and then people will present there who are having heart attacks or other medical emergencies, expecting to be able to call the emergency services. They won't be able to. I expect to see people dying. Standalone point-to-point radio systems do still work. All the Cambridgeshire local authorities used to have radio. The picture on my slide shows the now defunct antennas on East Cambs District Council. These used to connect to their radio room. Those radios were taken out in the 90s. So although there used to be fallback communications, this is now gone. No budget or will to install commercial gear. And my organisation, Raynet, has volunteers up to a point. We could probably staff 2 rest centres for about a day, is the reality. After that, we'd be desperately stretched. The radio hams, however, in Cambridgeshire, Raynet is mostly made up of radio amateurs. There are hundreds of radio amateurs in Cambridgeshire. They've got the equipment, the knowledge and skill, and having polled them, many of them would be willing to help out. They themselves are not necessarily members of Raynet. They have usable infrastructure. All over Cambridgeshire are things called repeaters, which are funded by subscription by the radio amateurs. This map here shows the coverage of probably the most powerful one in Cambridgeshire, but there's about 5 or 10 others. This is GB3PI, and you'll notice that its coverage area extends from North London right up to the Wash. Oh, next slide. I'm sorry, Charlie. Thank you very much. Sorry, I forgot to call out for the next slide. That shows the coverage area of that thing. If we have time during the question and answer session, I'll be able to show the use of that with my colleague Marek over there, who's also brought a walkie-talkie radio. You have to call upon these guys if you want them to help, though. Next slide, please, Charlie. Here's a couple of pictures of the equipment that Raynet has. The first picture shows us working on a simulated rail crash up at Peterborough. And it also shows our incident control vehicle located at Warboys, which unsurprisingly has a huge radio tower there because that's an excellent location for radio. Final slide, please, Charlie. So ensuring resilient communications is actually a very well understood issue. The technology is inexpensive, widely available and easily deployable. Walkie-talkie like that costs about £20. If you want a really powerful radio, which you could fit in a vehicle or use as a base station at home, something like that will reach all of Cambridgeshire with a decent antenna. And I looked at the price of this online this morning, it's £180. So you'd need an antenna and a battery to power it. So if we want resilient communications within the county, either somebody finds the budget for a commercial solution, or they get onto the radio hams and ask them to help. But so far, nobody has bothered to do that. So my prediction is, within the current approach, which is to do neither, is that we will wait until the public inquiry, at which point lessons will be learned. I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Mike. Very lucid and sobering. So next next we have Golzar Zandi, who is the Development Project Manager for Cambridge City Council.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Golzar. I'm Project Development Manager at Cambridge City Council and Member of Trustees at North Cambridge Community Partnership. Today, I'm going to reflect on the experience that I had in terms of public consultations and how the effective communication can actually fed into the resilience. So I'm showing my slides. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'd like to cast your minds back to early 2020, sometimes around here, that almost overnight everything changed. Streets became quiet and shop closed, and the way we live daily lives shifted completely. And activities that we took for granted just started to change. We used to attend the community events, and suddenly we had to stop them all. I remember I planned for an Easter egg hunt, and that was really popular. We normally had around 250 to 300 people there. Then just with an email, I realized that this is not going to happen and we need to change the setting. So I came up with the initiative. It was very early days to start some Easter egg hunt packs and just take these to people's homes so that children can do this at their own home. As you can see, those smiley faces and all those little masterpieces, they were very happy receiving these. But this wasn't possible without the help of the volunteers. That you can see our very first volunteer of COVID volunteer actually on the picture. And as people reflected later, they mentioned that this is now the time that the local community started to act. So there were it was the time that actually we started to do things in a different way. We go to the next slide. So the scale and scope of the activities that we were doing were increased over time, and we have started working collaboratively with different groups, community groups, and also working with the traders, with local shops. Tesco's gave us a lot of support, so we managed to broaden the scope of the things that we were doing, and also just demographically cover a lot more people, and also different groups from young people and families to older residents were involved in what we were doing. And this created a collaborative approach that we learned more how to work in partnership with other organizations and community groups and local businesses. And the key outcome from this was actually an expanded community-led approach. And I remember that we had a call from NHS asking us if we can recruit some volunteers together with Abbey people for the vaccination. That we had around 67 volunteers that helped with organizing the vaccination, just having the arranging for the car parks, admitting people in, and just other stuff. So this is how actually those group of volunteer networking changed into a vital asset that helped with the community. Next slide, please. And talking about urban resilience, so it's just the ability of the city to prepare for, respond to, and recover from shocks and stresses during a crisis or major change. There's three key pillars that we build this up on. So it's just a strong infrastructure that we need, a physical system, a community strength that people who are connected and supported will be involved in this, and adaptive governance that we need to have the leadership. But when we look at the work that I'm currently involved in, is just the regeneration projects around the city, you realize that when we talk about resilience in that context, regeneration is a very important example. These projects often affect a large number of people, and it can fundamentally change the way they live, the way they work, where they spend their spare times. And also the level of change can be significant. For many residents, it might feel very uncertain and unsettling. And some people are asked to move, or their surrounding is changed in a way that they feel like they need to adapt into that. So there is often uncertainty about what future will look like, how long things will take, and also what will the final outcome will be. But the main thing about that is that it's not just about how individuals are going to cope. It's equally just to make sure how the process is supporting them to go through this change. Next slide, please. So For all the projects, we normally set up a communication strategy and a communication plan based on the statement of the community involvement. This is a document that has been adopted in March 2024, and it set out how the public can get involved in planning applications and policy makings. It says when consultations happens and what are the methods for that engagement, and also how the feedbacks are considered in the decision. Next slide, please. So I would like to talk about a few points that actually I have learned throughout this and what is the best way of the communication. So the first key point was about reaching out to people. So it's just identifying the involvement barriers to make sure no one is left out, and also to make sure that everyone's aware of what's happening and feeling engaged. So we often hear the word hard to reach people, and I would like to say there are not much hard to reach people. It's just the way we plan to reach them. And also it's just about finding out what are those hidden barriers that actually we need to overcome to help them to engage. And from the work that I have done, one of the key things that I've realized is just time, confidence, and the languages are the three key things that I've identified. And one of the main things is just the confidence. I have realized that a lot of people, they feel like they don't have actually a valuable opinion to share. And one of the ways that we engage with them is just to start a conversation with a very simple question that they know the answer. And you feel like when they feel like they have something to say, they start to talk to you, and then they come up with the ideas. The other thing is around the time. So when we look at the demographics of the people who normally take part in the consultations, you can see that the time and the ethnic group are very specific. But how can we reach more people? Finding out that a lot of people are from young families, or they don't have the time to engage. So we normally tend to go where they are. So now we are arranging for the meetings to just drop into the food banks, to the community halls, to where people are there, and then we can just engage with them. And also different languages. So at the moment on council websites, people can use 16 different languages to take the material in that context. And also we work collaboratively with other officers to make sure if there are any specific language barriers, because if somebody doesn't speak English, you can't even write a letter to them and say, would you like material in other language? So we need to have a bit of more information in advance to be able to get in touch with them. And other thing that I just realized very recently in the latest consultation was that although a lot of people are digitally skilled, they still prefer to have their paper copies and hard copies. We had incidents that there were copies of the reports at the libraries, and you could see that people are just taking them home, reading them and bringing them back, although they have written, please can you not take them home? So we are now leaving some material for them and say, please take home, read it and bring it back, just so they can borrow those just like the books. Next slide, please. And the other important thing is just the misinformation and the rumors. So it's really important that we address the common misconceptions and false information very quickly. Correcting these promptly even prevents the confusion and also reduces the spread of misinformation, and just giving people the right source, just where they can find the proper information, and also keeping the messages consistent in all channels. If it's face-to-face, if it's online, it's just officers talking to people is really important. And also talking people's language and use terms and examples that are familiar for them, keep it concise, and also fewer words, more graphics, things that people help people to engage more. Next slide, please. And the other thing that we are now working on is just breaking the feeling of us and them in the throughout the consultation. So traditional setting for the consultation is normally we are having a presentation, a question and answer time, and people can ask their questions, but we are moving away from that. So we are trying to have much more interactive ways. We are arranging for walkabouts around the project area, or having drop-in sessions with some boards that people can come in, they can take their time, read throughout the boards. If they have any questions, there are people available there to talk to them. We have tables set up that informal workshops with drawings that people can sit down and talk about those. At the same time, there are some safe corners for people if they want to have more private conversations. So it's just giving the people to grasp the information at their own pace and also get involved in the way that they prefer to. And also making sure that this is a both way and ongoing conversation, so it's not one-off, and it's not something that the way when we receive the feedbacks, just showing that we acknowledge what we have heard and how we have implemented that in the designs. Next slide, please. And the other key point that we're normally working on is just based on the networks that were built even more throughout the COVID, is just build on the social infrastructure that already exists. So a lot of people, it's very important to have a sort of a social map and drawing based on that to find out how people get their information, where, who actually do they connect to, what are the main hubs that they get influenced by. So, and just find out how the information flow naturally and build upon that. So we found community leaders are really helpful in, and also the Facebook pages, local WhatsApp, or the channels that we are already using to get information to people. Next slide, please. And one of the other key things that is being raised is just the managing uncertainty. So people feel very much stressed when there are unknowns for them. And it's really important to be honest and open, and just even acknowledging if there are unknown points that we're not aware of, explaining the trade-offs in an honest way, and also letting them to choose, and also not to overpromise, because that builds trust a lot, that breaks the trust a lot. And also building the capacity over the time. So it's really important that we make a community that is more self-reliant in a way, and also people that can manage uncertainty on their own. And also it's about building capability over the time. So we want to have some community and people who are feeling confident to get involved, and also know where to go for information, and also involving younger generations just helps us to take this through time, and having more ownership on the projects that are happening. Next slide, please. And so the key question, I mean, I had in the end, I wanted to respond. What can we learn from that kind of response that we received to the consultations for a more effective communication, and how can we build resilience based on that? So the key point from my point of view and the experience that we had through these years was keeping the pace. So moving quickly, but also with clarity, inclusivity, and simplified messaging. And people need information that is easy to understand, is timely, and reach to everyone, and no one's felt left behind. And also at the same time, we need to build the capacity in advance. It means that we need to develop communication skills and the infrastructures at the moment before anything happens. And we can make sure that our community systems are prepared before they're needed, and the local networks are strengthened enough to support that. Such community can respond adapt, and support itself more effectively when any challenges arise. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that talk. Really good information. So yeah, thank you again to all the speakers for your talks, and for communicating the information that you have. We will be writing a report that summarizes all the information that was presented here tonight, and also in our other in the other events in this series. So you'll have another opportunity to read that information. So if you are interested in helping contribute to that report, please get in touch with me or with Charlie after the meeting. Okay, so with us tonight are 3 members of local government. So I will introduce each of you, and you will have 3 minutes to summarize what you've heard tonight and to ask 1 question to the panel. So first up, we have Councillor Richard Swift.
Thanks very much, Chair. Once again, very, very interesting. This is now, I think, the 5th how resilient is Cambridge, and completely different from any of the others, but with some similarities. Laura Ellis, the BBC local radio, that was very interesting. I didn't know an awful lot of those things. One of the things I was concerned about was during the COVID crisis, there was a lot of a feeling that some of the central government BBC information was being manipulated by the central government narrative. And I just wondered whether she could actually say about whether local radio is more free to actually deal with problematic narratives that might not be completely in keeping with the government overview. So I think that's an interesting thing I'd like to ask her. Mike, I thought that was very interesting. My 99-year-old father, who died in November, was a very keen radio ham. GC3PT was his call sign, so it's one of the very, very first ones. And at last, he's been vindicated as being perhaps the future, instead of just sort of saying 5 and 9 old man and all of those sort of things, which was a bit of a joke for my family when I was growing up in the 1960s. Actually, his future will be actually come to its own if there's God forbid, a catastrophic meltdown. And then Golzar, I thought it was very interesting about the local liaison with residents. One of the things with, for example, the Arbury Court redevelopment and the Brackley Close and Kingsway Flats redevelopment proposals is there's been lots of consultations at the Meadows and Nathan Street, for example, but there's a perception that there's been misinformation, and that misinformation not from the City Council but from other people who are scaring the public with misinformation. But there's also a perception that the public will actually say their views in these 5-hour-long public consultations of the Meadows, but actually it's a fait accompli, and that the plan will go ahead regardless of what the public thinks. And so there is a trust issue that actually, if the consultation actually says that there's a widespread feeling about one thing, for example, the footprint area of the park in Arbury Court, that it will be a genuine equal footprint. And also it won't actually have verges and pocket parks included, things like that. And that's been very clearly stated that that is the case, that it will actually be a proper, true equivalence. So one of the things is about the trust agenda, and I'd like to just say a little bit about that. Thank you.
If we come to Laura online first, thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's a really good question. And I think I'd like to answer it in 2 ways, really. First of all, we do have a lot of freedom in local radio to ask the questions that need to be asked. And you may recall there was a really fantastic set of interviews that we did with one of the prime ministers. Now, I wish I could remember which one it was, but they will quite often do the rounds of local radio and sit themselves down for what some might be thinking are going to be quite soft, quite gentle interviews, and there never are. Local radio presenters will not hesitate, not only ask the questions, but also to represent local views. We also have access, for example, to local academics. You have many of those in Cambridge, local experts that we can bring in if we feel there is an element of the story that perhaps we're not hearing as clearly as we might from central government. So there's a lot of freedom, and there's certainly a lot of appetite to make sure that we get to the bottom of some of the questions that our audience are asking. And of course, those will vary. So in one area, it might be access to a particular thing. or it might be arguments over whether you can walk in the Peak District. We had a lot of coverage of that. If you recall, there was some very, very zealous policing. Whether you consider it overzealous or not is a case in point, but where people were being arrested for being out walking, etc. So I think one of the wonderful things about local radio is that you can actually, you have the time, you have the space, and you have the local interest and expertise to explore those things. So whilst we may not be able to, to give you a complete overview of scientific position on, you might be able to in some cases, but the local government, the central government narrative, what we will try to do is unpick it and make it relevant in each case for local audiences, which might involve all kinds of expertise, local or national. Thank you for the question. I think it's a really good one.
And Mike?
Thank you. Yeah, well, it's quite interesting to see that even the old ways can still be useful. This old-fashioned radio technology still has its place. There's I'm not sure if it's a military acronym, but for people who are concerned about resilient communications, they use this acronym called PACE, P-A-C-E. And if you want to have resilient communications, you need a primary, an alternate, a contingency, and an emergency channel. And at the moment, I think for most people, we just have the primary. There is the digital world out there. There's telephony, WhatsApp, internet, email. As I say, that all goes down one pipe. And when that pipe breaks, what's your alternate? What's your contingency? What's your emergency? The emergency channel, when I did the 3-day Mighty Oak exercise, was actually to have runners going from Cambridge to Huntingdon to get information about what to do in an emergency. I submit to this group that that is not an adequate solution.
With the first How Resilient is Cambridge on food, there was Professor Tim Lang, and he had this idea in a national policy, instead of just in time, just in case. And with supermarkets, it's just in time, and it will be a disaster if even a day goes by without the supplies coming. It seems that there should be a lot of crossover between food sustainability and everything else, for example, communications as well.
I know that central government now has been spooked by what they've learned from this. I was at a fairly high-flying resilience conference down in London on Tuesday, which had 3 Lords of the Realm and the head of the Cobra committee. And they are now also, the Strategic Defence Review talks in depth about pushing resilience down into the communities. There is apparently now funding for that to happen, and we may start to see some of that being rolled out. You may know more about that than I do, but the Cabinet Office was certainly saying that this is something that they want to have happen over the next 2 to 3 years, and I think it's not before time.
And Golzar.
So regarding the development at RB Court in North Cambridge, so when the consultation report was published, we held a drop-in session, and we invited all the public and the local to come to the event, and we were very much open, and we acknowledge on the feedbacks that we have received. And we are also planning on ongoing engagement with residents affected, with traders, and with the other stakeholders. We will be back at RB Carnival, and also we're planning on the co-design of the park. So we have 100 people registered at the moment. So that the walkabouts and also all how the workshops are going to work, that's what we're planning. And we have been gathering all the feedbacks, and they will be reflected in the designs, and I'm sure people will be happy when they see the changes that we're making. Our architects are working hard on that. Regarding the misinformation, we have tried to, anything, I used to read all the Facebook posts and the comments to make sure that we don't miss anything, and any feedback that we received from the councillor. So we work with the local organization at the same time, alongside the channels that we have at Cambridge City Council. And we try to give them the first-hand information and asking them to share those information with their members. And if we use the local Facebook channels and their WhatsApps, and all the information were shared throughout them as well. So we hope to tackle these very quickly, and there was some misunderstanding with the traders as well. So we are running regular meetings with them and giving information to them as well.
Thanks very much. That's great.
So we'll take comments and questions from the councillors, and then we'll move on to general Q&A. So we'll come to general Q&A in about 10 minutes. And next, Councillor Tim Griffin.
Hi, thank you. And thanks to all of the speakers today. That was very interesting. I think everyone was talking. I mean, this is a huge topic, communications in general, and I think everyone was actually talking about networks, right? Networks, either institutional ones, the BBC is an example, or technical, the technical infrastructure that we've built, or the importance of communities, person-to-person human communication. And they're all kind of, they're all really important aspects to this general issue. As a techie myself, I mean, I'm a computer scientist by training, and when I did my doctorate in the 80s, I was in kind of a very small subculture of computer science at the time, which was about proving correctness of programs. And it was considered kind of a weirdo, kind of exotic, theoretical, impractical branch of computer science at the time. And what's happened over my career is that it's become more and more and more important. And actually, a lot of the big companies now are employing big groups of people that use some of these tools that have been developed over the last 40 years, let's say, to actually to prove the correctness of their programs and stuff. So that I just want to reassure people that is sort of one branch of computer science that is growing, becoming more important, but it still is nowhere near as widespread as it should be. The other thing about that is that typically when people do verify or test systems, they don't often test how they interact with other systems. And I think one of your first slides, Mike, showed that the complexity of this has to do with the layering upon layering upon layering, and there's hidden dependencies there that make it extremely difficult to get a handle on the resilience and robustness of the whole system. And that's a huge challenge, and that will remain a challenge. But at least there are people in the community that are being listened to, and progress is being made, let's say, in that direction. I don't really have any particular question. I just wanted to say that this has been very good, interesting. Thinking about it, I realized that if the power goes out in my house, the only way I can get a radio, listen to the radio, is go out to the car and turn it on. I realized there's not a single AM or FM radio in the house that's not hooked up to the internet. So which is probably not a good thing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Olafot.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's been great. I mean, quite a lot of what has been said by everyone really resonated with me. And I think I also work in research, and I think in data analysis, just like in computer science, we often talk about robustness. So lots of algorithms work well when the assumptions are met, but what happens if you just disturb things a little bit, and things can crash down quite easily. I also sort of reminded myself that actually when first few years of my life, we actually neither had telephone at home or of course the internet didn't exist back then, and still things seem to work okay. So there's some hope, I think, that maybe we remember what we used to do in the old days. I mean, we still had analog radios though. And luckily I've never lived through a disaster, so I should say, so I don't know what would have happened back then. And I also used to hang out with radio amateurs. I mean, I didn't have a license myself, but I had, I mean, is that one that do you need a license for that particular one, for the big one? But for the big one, for the other one? Because I had one, but they didn't up to 2 watts or something. You didn't need a license and stuff. Anyway, yeah, exactly. So that was good fun. But some people told me that was sort of the 80s, that apparently the first time
people heard about something must have gone wrong in Chernobyl was actually via radio amateurs. So I don't know if that's true or if they just sort of, anyway, but I mean, it's clearly source of information potentially that is beyond sort of government control and regulated media. And also it was mentioned already that, yeah, obviously everything relies on electricity, but also the mobile networks and lots of media, I mean, they are run by private companies. So if they decide to pull the plug or to just run and into safety themselves, then we are buggered, I guess. And that's why I would like to give a shout out to our public broadcaster, the BBC. So hopefully they have our well-being in mind when it comes to that. So, and from everything I've heard from the three speakers, I mean, I sort of developed for myself a little hierarchy here of sort of the structure, resilient structure that we might need. And it seems that some of these it's already in place. So I think at the lowest level, we need the networks at a personal level, basically people knocking on doors, people looking after each other. So I happen to be a fire monitor at work. So when the fire alarm goes off, I'm supposed to knock on some office doors and see that nobody's lying there on the ground, stuff like that. I guess COVID was because things, networks like that existed. And on top of that, I think there should be something like a resilient electronic communication network. I mean, that's where, so this personal network, I guess that's where Golzar comes in. I guess that's what you are doing. And I guess sort of this communication network, at the next level would be sort of mic radio amateurs, people sort of working sort of on a local level, creating this kind of networks. I was just wondering if there's any point of, if there's some way you could possibly use the infrastructure, for example, from the BBC, sort of the big broadcasters, if there's any way one can make that link between these groups. And finally, of course, there should be some emergency system that uses mobile phones and internet services as long as they last, and we should make them obviously last for as long as possible. So even if electricity breaks down or cables break and stuff like that. So this is sort of what I took away from this, but also something that has been mentioned a few times, but I think we should really be, it should be also, I think, emphasized a bit more, that once people feel threatened, and we are talking about resilience, climate emergency, but it could also be war, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow or something like that. People panic and they will turn against each other. So movies have been made about this, and I think they're not that far from reality, I guess. So how can we basically make ourselves resilient to that kind of possibly what's in human nature, that as soon as we feel threatened and cornered and feel that there's not enough for everyone, that we try to turn against the weakest or what we consider the weakest, and actually work together, not against each other in situations like that. I guess that's my big question. So thank you.
Would any of the panelists like to give a response before we move on to public Q&A? Yeah, Mike, go for it.
I'll make a few observations. I think, as Tim Griffin said, systems complexity is something that's very hard to model. It's very easy to look at a single component and say this works, this is provably correct even. I mean, I've worked in safety critical computer systems and I've had to do some similar stuff at times, but you can't predict how things work when they're put together. And I think there at least you need, I come back to this thing about, not necessarily for communications, but primary alternate contingency. One does need to be prepared. If you're looking for civil resilience, first of all, there has to be a conversation about it. I think perhaps we have gone along a little bit too long thinking that everything's comfortable, everything works. And now might be a time to start having that conversation about, well, what will I do if the power goes off? What will I do if there's no water? Let me have a conversation with the people on my street. Let me have a conversation with the people in my, whatever my network is. And let's start building some kind of resilience in there. That's not a conversation that the UK seems confident having, but other nations do manage to do that, as I understand it. The Scandinavian countries, I believe, are better prepared for that kind of thing. They keep 3 or 4 days food on hand, think about where you'll get your water from. And if people are at least well fed and they've got something to drink, then they will have the time to contribute to solving whatever the problem is. If everybody's scratching around for water and calories, then they're not going to be in a good place. So, I have no better answer to it than that, but we probably do now need a public conversation about this and to start looking into how we might solve it. That's the best I can say, I'm afraid.
Any of the other panelists? Don't worry if not, it's no problem. Okay, that's the case. Helen, hand back over to you quickly.
Yeah, I'll just quickly thank the councillors for taking the time to be with us tonight. We get your input. And we'll move on to general Q&A. So Charlie is going to run the general Q&A from online questions and in person. And I'll just say, so if you want, should I do this?
I can do it if you like.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, sorry, just pulling it up. I apologise. What I'm saying. So yes, for those who would like to speak or ask a question, just raise your hand and I will grab you. That's great. Thank you very much. And then we can go through as we go along. Please think while you're listening. For those who are around the outside, if you don't have a microphone and you want to contribute, just sit at one of the desks. For those online, if you'd like to ask a question, I know there's been one or two in the chat. You can either ask that yourself or I can ask for you. Just let me know. If you don't feel comfortable speaking, you can write it down on a piece of paper and come and pass it to me, and I can ask it on your behalf, or take a piece of paper there. And finally, if you're able to address your questions to a specific speaker, that would be very helpful. And as mentioned, we're here to talk about the issues raised, not necessarily the politics. So that would be very handy to keep on track. I should say we've got about 40 minutes for this before I hand back to Helen. So I think we'll start with this gentleman over here who had his hand, and in the meantime, please think of questions.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm here by chance. I just got a notification of it, so I popped in. Enormously interesting. I've written down a few points, something that made me think about. First of all, if it was to happen right now, how would anybody know what to do? Is there a green book? Is there something that comes out on the council tax, which gives us some information of where we might go to? Because such is the state of international politics right at this moment, something could happen right now. You know, we don't know. We're moving into a very dangerous period, I think. So here's a few questions. Can solar panels be used to provide electricity if the power goes down? Now, that's something that people should know how to do, because most people with solar panels have got batteries, but I wouldn't know what to do if the power went off. I don't know if the batteries kick in and give me power, but that is an enormous resilience in the community, enormous. How would our radio work? Tim makes the point about you'd have to go out to your car. Not everybody's got a car, but most people have got access to a car. Could all go and sit around our radios. How could we jury rig our router? Because the internet is going to be key in this potential for getting messages out. Do we have a website or a Facebook page, probably best, that we could all turn to? But we'd need to know how to make our router work. If the power goes down, but the internet's still running, I wouldn't know what to do with I suppose I could get a lot of batteries and tie them on the side, but is there a way of doing that? Should we know about that? Should that be information that people have been given? So I'm saying that there should be some sort of notice. I'm assuming the council have organised this meeting today. They should put something out. They've got Cambridge Matters, which goes out every month. There's the rates, there's information, there should be perhaps a site. But just to give us something, what would we do rather than panic? You know, does the water still run if the power goes down? I don't think it does, because water's pumped. So should everybody fill their bath up straight away if they can? A lot of people don't have loft tanks anymore because modern heating systems and water systems take away the need for all of that. So there'd be no emergency water supply in the house. So all you would have is what drains out of the pipework. So enormously interesting. I don't even know why I'm here. Just somebody said pop in and have a look. So, and I have some interest in resilience. I was a member of the fire service for over 30 years. So I have a thought about things like that. So my mind runs to these sorts of things. But I think that if this is a council organised thing, then we definitely should be issuing some sort of notification about solar panels, because there's some in every road in Cambridge, I would guess. How you jury rig your router would be, you know, can you bring your car battery in and connect it to your router? That sort of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Would any of the panelists like to respond? I know Laura does, and then we might come to you, Mike.
I think Mike's going to be brilliant on the electricity and other infrastructure questions. But if I can just quickly say that I'm very glad you did come along. And this is really making me think, because several years ago, we used to very regularly advise people on the issue of what they needed to do in an emergency. And Mike, you'll be very pleased to hear it was quite often wind-up radios, radios that could work without power. It was often a grab bag. I mean, that phrase, you'd have a grab bag and you'd fill it full of things that you would need if you had to evacuate your house in the event of some kind of emergency. I think we've taken our eye off the ball on that for a bit. I don't remember us talking about that as much recently as we have done, and perhaps that's something we should think about, just reminding people, about those very simple things that we can all do just to prepare ourselves, get in supplies of water if we're going to be in our houses, get things ready to leave our houses should we need to. Local radio and our local digital teams would always put up a live page, which would be regularly updated in the case of an emergency. Now, assuming you have the power to get to that on your phone or on a computer somewhere, that would be the source of a lot of information. We've very much moved into that realm in the last few years of having one page that you keep updating, obviously sitting alongside any sort of local radio broadcasting that you might wish to tune into. So lots of food for thought. Thank you very much for the question. But I think Mike will have much more sensible things to say about solar panels and filling up your bath.
Okay, I'll go down these quickly because this does touch on areas where I have some knowledge. I should put my Ely ARC hat on, because one of the first things that we're doing in our group is writing a handbook for household resilience. This is something that is shamefully neglected in the UK. Most of the Scandinavian countries have one of these already. Every household will have one in a drawer somewhere, and it tells you what to do. So we're writing one for the Ely area. We intend to publish that under a Creative Commons license and to encourage other groups to basically copy it and adapt it for their area. We would like to think that because we're a community group, we might be slightly more trusted than the big hand of government telling you what to do. We can also say things that government is afraid of saying because it might frighten the horses. So that handbook is in draft at the moment. We have a problem. If you're a community, a voluntary group with no funding, you can't get indemnity insurance. And that's currently the blocker on our publishing that at the moment. But once we've solved that problem, we might be able to get it published, and there might be a handbook that at least you can download and print or something. We will also be talking to the various local authorities in Cambridgeshire and the local resilience forum to see whether or not they can sort of bite the bullet and to say, okay, we'll publish this on your behalf. That's all depending. Solar, that's difficult. That would be a much longer discussion than we have time for. Potentially, yes, the answers there are difficult. Reliable radio, I would recommend everybody has a radio in their house in case of emergency, and some batteries, and also check you can tune it in. Look East did a program about 10 years ago where they took a radio out into the streets and gave it to young people and said, tune this into a radio station, and they couldn't. So the ability to actually tune a radio in is now a lost art. But yeah, you should have a radio at home. It's important to know, in a widespread power outage, Radio 2 and Radio 4 are expected to stay on air, and they have hardened feeds from the studios to keep them broadcasting. I've had a word with Laura about the problem of getting a message back to Radio 2 and 4, because if the community wants to get a message out, like, for example, if Addenbrooks want to say to half the clinical staff, please don't all turn up, that back channel is something that Laura and I have agreed to talk about offline. Internet, I can't say about that, but you ask a very important question about water. And the thing which scared me most about Exercise Mighty Oak, which was the 72-hour power outage, was that basically water supplies in the UK collapse after 24 hours and they don't come back, because not only is the water lost because of pumping loss, the loss of sewage pumping then means that all the surface water courses are polluted, and it may be months before potable water returns. So if the lights go out, for God's sake, don't flush the toilet, because the cistern might be the last bit of drinking water you've got.
On that note, we'll, Golzar, please, you respond.
Very interesting point, actually. I just wanted to add one from the community perspective, that the mutual aid groups that were formed throughout COVID, I think that's a very good opportunity at the moment to introduce them more to people who are, because a lot of people knew them and used them and were in contact, but there are still some people that might not be completely familiar with them. And it's really helpful and useful to have them as points of contact, one-to-one contact. Where are the meeting points? What are the supports that they provide? So that's another thing that can be added to the community bit of this. Thank you.
Wonderful. We will come to an online question, and then we'll come to the two hands in the room. Thank you. Francis, would you be able to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yep. Yep. Can you hear me okay?
You can indeed.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, so I was intrigued by Laura put a comment in the chat saying she'd been talking to some school children and they said, what was life like before AI? And it made me think that when we're talking about the scenarios where different sort of services and things we're used to are not available, some of us older folk can remember living, like the chap said earlier, without a telephone, definitely without the internet. And just the whole kind of communication landscape was so different. And although obviously we had electricity, we were nevertheless used to living in a world without the internet and AI. And young people growing up now won't be. It just won't be in their psychology what it's like to live in a world without all this just at your fingertips. And so I was thinking that, you know, I wonder if that would have an impact on how people respond in some kind of crisis. I don't know whether any work has been done on that. When people are doing scenario planning, for example, do they take those sort of age differences and the associated lived experience into account when they're modelling how people might respond? Yeah, I'd just be interested in people's thoughts on that, really. Thank you.
Mike, please go for it.
Yeah, I don't have a particularly good answer to that, but I would suggest the document which I asked people to read, which was The Living Without Power, that explored the responses of people in the community to the experience of Lancaster being without power. Now, that was 11 years ago now, I think, so it was quite some time back. But even there, they mentioned the feeling of disorientation that people had without instant information being available. And I think that's probably something which will be even worse nowadays. I have no particular solution to that, but as planners, I think it is worth noting that if people don't have access to information, that's when misinformation starts to flow, and paying attention to being able to get a message out of some kind. If you're sitting there in the cold, because of course your heating stopped working with the lights out, you are not going to be in a good place. So from the point of view of people's mental health, their confidence, being able to get some kind of messaging to them saying that it's only for 12 hours or it's for 72 hours or whatever is really quite important. So for people responsible for planning this kind of thing, this really does need to be up there on the list of getting reliable information out to the public.
Any other panelists? Go for it, Laura. Yeah, please go for it.
So I think, Mike, your point about the booklet that you're making, the communications that you're creating around planning for emergencies, it's really made me think. I'm talking to these school children today. So I was talking to year 9 to year 13. It's quite a big chunk of age group. And one of the things they said about AI, because that's what we were talking about, was, do you think it will remove our ability to do some things that we are currently able to do? And we had a really good discussion about things like reading a paper map. You know, how many of us can still do that? You know, lots of us actually probably, but as those generations move on, they get much more used to doing things on a phone because it was easier, it's simpler, it's more available. And one of the things I said to them, actually quite prescient now that I think about it, was you need to think about the skills that you might need to fall back on. You know, should you not be able to use your phone? Should you not be able to get the information that you're getting through chatbots? you need to just remember not to lose those skills. If you never need to shoe a horse again, because we're not living in sort of, 1800, then that's probably not a problem. But you might need to know how to do things which you're currently relying on AI or technology for, that, for some reason you might just need to work around at some point. Little did I know that this would be something that we talked about so much tonight, but it really is kind of linking those two conversations together. I think providing that sort of resilience for the generations that have not had to do the things that you mentioned, Francis, is a really, really good thing to be thinking about. And I would also love to see any research that anybody has on it, because I think it's an absolutely fascinating point. So thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Next, we'd still like to ask a question. We'll come to this gentleman. And did your hand still up? Yeah, and we'll come to your gentleman, and then we'll go online, and then we'll come to you.
I think I'm Peter Dorr. I did Pipettes. I brought the internet to the UK. Sorry. One of the things you can do is have a local network. It's all very well saying, Gmail, Facebook, and what have you, but probably, the more links you've got in your chain, the less reliable it is. And a link going all the way to the US and back, with all the dependencies of that, is very unlikely. On the other hand, putting up a strong Wi-Fi signal in the market square would provide some coverage. In order for it to work, you'd also need a DNS, you'd want a web server, you'd want an email server, and But what I'm talking about here is something that will fit on a Raspberry Pi and can be powered for weeks on a car battery. But like all of these things, if it's not used and it's not switched on, for want of a better word, it rusts. So the first thing is, have your data on a local server. Don't put it into the cloud. Is the first thing. Then, if these things do happen, you pull in the people who know about this and say, never mind the world, let's get it working for a bit of Cambridge, a lot of Cambridgeshire, as far as digital's concerned. As far as the consumer's concerned, the good news is they all have a device which doesn't actually need a router for Wi-Fi, and that is their mobile phone. As long as they're within a Wi-Fi signal connected to the Cambridge net, they will be able to do stuff. So, I say, not a question, sort of an offer or a suggestion.
Thank you. And then we will come, that's really helpful. Thank you. This is all the inputs from this session will be going into the report. So comments on this are very, very, do go somewhere. So thank you. Yes, gentleman here.
Right. So I think I'll introduce myself briefly. So I'm Marek. So I am the current controller of the Raynet Cambridgeshire, a colleague of Mike in one of his hats. I also work as an high performance computing manager at one of the university departments, and I'm overall a bit of a skeptic about all this technology stuff, even though I work with it. But yeah, comment on what has just been said, and also a question. So comment about this resilient communications. Yes, this can be done in a way. I mean, internet, or ARPANET, as well, back then, it was designed specifically to come with a distributed, to be distributed and decentralized. It's just a pity that we ended up evolving towards the big pipes and single providers. But in theory, we couldn't have this kind of local networks if a bit of effort is put into it. Well, there was, I think, early last year, there was a report for the European Commission about what's specific about living communications in wartime. It wasn't arguably because the Polish Prime Minister said at the time that effectively Europe is already at war, which just it's not the conventional war yet. And we were talking about, the comment discussion was about how resilient our communication systems, specifically about the internet mostly, are. And the comments were, of course, we've been throwing things into the cloud. And now, of course, even if Mr. Orange in Washington decides to switch it off, they will switch it off, and let alone if we get somebody actually hostile to us doing something bad. So we've lost this decentralization in there. But there are systems people like people have been working on this very simple off-grid mesh, so store and forward type communication systems. They are slow. It's not broadband like internet, but if you still remember how you used to really try to compact your messages in plain text because you are on dial-up, you could still communicate that way. The problem is a lot of those systems are being developed by enthusiasts, and so you get a system which works in theory fine, but you put a heavy congestion in it, it clogs up. So that's one thing we would actually try to the government at any level support could help, try to input some help into the development of this kind of system. But yeah, enough about that. My question is, so of course I've already heard from Mike from this conference, the government would very much like the lower level government institutions like councils, counties and so on to start working resiliency. The question is, how much can we actually do at this lower level, which does not sometimes directly conflict with what central government of whatever current political option might be in charge wants us to do? Like going back to resilience about other supplies, I mean, Cambridgeshire is pretty low on water. And then we hear central government saying we need to build more 120,000 houses in Cambridge area because we're the technical hub. So yeah, who cares about water? We'll figure it out. And then now we've got, so we have got independent schools which actually do put more focus on really trying to do things with your hand, on being creative and not really being glued to your tablet or whatever it is that you use. But then we have another government which comes and slaps VAT on the tuition fees. And yes, I know the idea was about get like a big private schools like no names given, but then you've got the places like the Cambridge Steiner Waldorf school where some teachers already had to voluntarily take pay cuts in order for the school to be able to function. And now they've got that. Or then we would like to switch off the copper communication, copper phones, and everything is going on. And then somebody, okay, what about emergency phones in the lifts? Oops, we didn't think about it, but no, we're already going ahead with that. So, oh yeah, the replacement for Airwave, because if you don't know, Airwave is in theory supposed to be on the way out, except the replacement system has been very severely delayed and way over budget. Replacement system is supposed to work on one of the UK mobile networks, which after just here, they've got very nearly zero battery power. There was this power cut in Bedford, I think, not too long ago, and there was this massive outrage from the network operators saying we cannot afford putting batteries on our base stations. So what can we do at our level, at our local community level, with putting it politely, inertia, and putting it not so politely, sometimes actual hindrance coming from the higher levels up?
Great, thank you. Anyone from the panel like to tackle that one? Please go for it.
I'll have a go. I think that's a huge question. And actually, that possibly, Helen, that might be something you'd want to pick up for a further series of talks, because putting resilience in at the community level, something I strongly believe in. I think it's the only way that you build resilience. You need resilient people, you need resilient families, you need resilient streets. You have to layer this all the way up, but it's a very interesting question, but I don't think we're going to answer it tonight, is my view. So maybe another series of talks.
So actually our next event, which will be in 2 weeks, is on communities, right? How can we have resilient communities?
Did the councillor? Oh yes, we will come to that question in a second. We've got one online. I would just like to say a few things which would be helpful here, that are compiled thoughts. So I mentioned to say that this is event organised by the Resilience Web, but in collaboration with the Cambridge Room, which is a local space. If anyone wants to host events like this, whether they be big scale, small scale, there's a space for that. If that's of interest, and we can help promote those sorts of things. One of the things that we're talking about in the Resilience Web and with our friends and partners is how do we move from hyperlocal streets and things like that to the local area or neighbourhood, to the sort of regional and to the national, and having those sorts of conversations. So welcoming those, and mentioning here as well that we will be doing a follow-up, I believe we said, on solutions and workshops and solutions. So again, look out for that if that's of interest. One other point here from online, but I'll read it out for you, Laura, you mentioned earlier, was In the old days, 90s, we had special mobile phones or numbers for key emergency responders, which would survive while other parts of the networks failed or were switched off. I think we've touched on those, but I was wondering if Mike, you or yourself, Golzar, Laura, I can't remember what it was called. Is that still a thing? Is there any information you might have around sort of emergency backups?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the question. So if you could repeat that, I'll try and listen.
Yes, of course. So in the old days of the 90s and before, there were sort of special mobile phones or numbers for key emergency responders to, which would survive when other parts of the network failed or were switched off. Is that still a thing?
That might be referring to congestion control. You can get special SIMs where if the network is really heavily overloaded, it will throw normal subscribers off, but it will allow emergency responders to keep going. That's fine as long as the base station is operational. But the problem is if the power goes off, most cell towers have no battery backup at all. Furthermore, when Ofcom asked the cell phone providers to put this in, they gave them the 2 fingers of respect in return, saying it's not our problem, make the power reliable. It's very difficult for cell phone providers. Most of the cabinets are at street level. If you walk around the street, you can actually see them, these poles with the antennas on them, little cabinet at the bottom. If they want to put batteries in, they have to get planning permission for more cabinets, more space. The batteries will be stolen. It's a really difficult thing to make the cell phone network reliable. So the congestion control stuff is a thing. And there are emergency providers who have phones which will carry on working provided the cell tower is up if it's overloaded with civilian traffic. But if the power's gone, it's gone, I'm afraid.
Yes, I just, there are a lot of techies in the room, so I'm just throwing a thought as well. So I've read somewhere that there are some apps you can have on the phone and that you don't need to have connection and people can get connected through those apps. Is that a solution of it?
Slightly outside of my space, so I'm not comfortable answering that. There is one thing coming along, which is, I think Elon Musk is trying to do this, and there are other satellite providers who are trying to do satellite to phone communications. And there are some facilities, I think Apple do this, where you can get an SMS out from your phone via satellite, but whoever you're trying to get it to has got to be able to receive it. So around the edges, there are some fringe cases. And provided you've got power, old Elon Musk's Starlink is a great way of getting internet into an area which is badly affected by power outages. So the situation is not necessarily dire, but you need to have this layered resilience. You need your primary, alternate, your contingent. You can't just rely on one. So I may have painted a slightly bleak picture, and I think it's good to start from a bleak one and brighten it up, rather than to kid yourself that things are rosy when they aren't.
Wonderful, thank you. We'll come to this lady next. And was there anyone else had a question? You have your comment, and then we'll come to you. Wonderful.
Hi, thank you very much for the interesting presentation. And I think that gives me an awareness of in case of fire, disaster and war, what happened. And also I learned from that some infrastructure, which is the radio and the antenna, and we are abundant for quite a long time and could be helpful in case there's any special disaster. But I have a question. 2 questions. One question is about the infrastructure. The other question is about the communication software. About the infrastructure, like the antenna, the radio, for us as a layman, I don't exactly know how to make them work. So because my communication is basically based on the Wi-Fi and the phone, will the provider, like the communication provider, like BT, British Communication, they provide most of the network in UK. Will they be involved in this resilient projects? And also, like the radio antenna, can Cambridge University conduct some research to invent an app or some device so that they can embed in the phone, and I can as a layman, and I can receive all such communication in case of any emergency. And the second thing is about the software side, because nowadays, most of people, I'm also the same, most of the time I rely on the phone, social media for communication. I heard it's like Scotland, the government will give the people a text message in case of any emergency. So I would ask, like the BBC Cambridgeshire or the Cambridgeshire Council, there will be a definite apps so that all the Cambridge people, they install it, Cambridgeshire, the residents install it, so they can get the information to their phone, and the apps can pop up emergency information when there's a disaster. So this is some question and idea I think about and throw to the speaker.
I think that mostly comes to me. The form of communications I was talking about is that it would be possible for, say, local authorities still to be able to communicate in case of a major power outage or infrastructure failure. There are no good options that I know of for the ordinary citizen, unless you bother to go and get yourself an amateur radio license and get all the equipment and train yourself how to install and use it. It's a really bad situation. We can put something in place which can make the emergency response less dire from the authorities and the people whose job it is to try and manage a situation like that. But for the ordinary citizen, there are a few things that there are license-free walkie-talkies which people can get, which might allow you to communicate within your street. But if you want to get it more than a mile distance, that's not going to help you. If you bother to train yourself and use something like CB radio, but we're starting to get into unrealistic territory here. For the average person, I'm afraid you're stuck, which is why this is such a bad problem. So it'd be really nice to say there was a simple answer and we could roll stuff out and it would be like nothing had happened. But actually, if the lights go out, we are really in a bad place if it goes out over a wide area for a long time, and people need to plan for it. Wish I could say something better.
No, actually, I think your idea is work as long as the researcher or the people, that we have a lot of the great scientists in UK, as long as the researcher, they use your idea to investigate and they research some new device and put it inside the phone, as a apps or a small device, put inside the phone, it works.
It may be possible. We're now moving into things which we can't do with technology which is here today. And that was what my talk was about. So yes, these things could all be done if there was a will, but I know of no solution to that which I could go out and buy now. And if you want it, somebody's going to have to make it.
Thank you. That's really helpful. We will come to you in a second. I'll just mention that we will. All these thoughts are very helpful. So these are sorts of things that we can put out in the report. That will be ideas that people can take forward. So thank you. It's really, really valuable. Come to you, please. Yeah.
Thank you. This is a really important one. Most of the things that you need to do in an emergency are against the law. Even sending out a hell to, he can't get insurance. But his radio, if he cranked up the power, he could cover the whole of Cambridgeshire easily, but he's restricted by the law. I can go on right the way through. Best practice in a good society, these laws are good. Who is going to take the responsibility, or who can have the responsibility to say, these laws are suspended. Any competent electrician can mess around with solar. They don't have to be MCS certified and what have you. And that Captain Hindsight doesn't come back when one person is damaged by this and say, well, you shouldn't have relaxed that. So we need, and this can't be something that's national. It needs to be something local. Maybe the head of police or the the chair of the council, but there does need to be this ability to suspend best practice for pragmatism.
Wonderful, thank you. This is very helpful. And what did you come to you
I
next?
think we should go with this gentleman first.
Yes, of course. Yeah, please go.
I think most of the talk about the content of communications has assumed that the content will come with good intentions. We haven't heard a lot, I think, about fake news. So perhaps this is a question for Laura. At least the BBC has BBC Verify, but it doesn't stop rumours from spreading very rapidly. And of course, the other up to the minute thing we've heard about is addictions to social media, where such fake news can travel extremely rapidly.
Great question. Thank you. Laura, would you like to come in?
Yes, so this is very much my specialist area. I think what I've learned from this session in the last hour or so has been that we really do need to double down on anticipating what kind of fake news or misinformation or malinformation we might see circulating in any one of a particular array of crises. I think work put into that at this point would be very, very useful in the long term. But yes, once it's out there, we do have measures that we can use to, in the department that I work in, the BBC R&D, they're doing a lot of work on deepfake detection. So how you can identify what a deepfake is and then explain what's happened to it and perhaps look at some of the intent behind it, which is also very important. But there's also work that we're doing, as you say, with BBC Verify about specific fact checking, forensic work, looking at whether a piece of video, for example, might have come from where it purports to come from, using all kinds of open source intelligence that we've been doing for years with things like BBC monitoring. So we have the tools and the experts and the facility in place to do that. I think the thing that we will become a victim of in any situation like that is scale, because the scarier a situation is, the more it is likely, as you say, to generate fake news, disinformation, misinformation. And I think a lot of the work that we're going to need to do is to be ahead of that game. And I just want to say one other thing in this particular answer, because one of the things we found particularly useful was being involved in things like Gold and Silver Command. So actually having people sitting in those meetings, it was often difficult because when a decision is being made, which is a difficult decision, you cannot always report in real time on that without causing potentially panic or some issues. So in a sense, you're not acting as a normal journalist in that situation. You're acting as somebody who almost becomes a bit of a go-between between information that might be useful, but is still confidential, information you can put out. And that's often a bit uncomfortable. But I think we'd rather do that and deal with that discomfort and then try and work out how, as communication specialists, we get the right information out to people. And again, that sort of access will also be very helpful when it comes to tackling, this scourge of mis and disinformation that we are inevitably going to see in this kind of crisis.
Thank you very much. It's really helpful. Would any of the other panelists like to add anything? No, you okay? That's great. Yes, and get your hands up if you've got a thought. We've got about 8 minutes-ish left before I pass back. So I know we're coming to you, but has anyone else got any others? If not, I'll think up one as well. Great, we'll come to you and then we'll come to you, yes.
Thank you very much for really inspiring talks. I just have a question actually for Mike. So in terms of, I was thinking about the acronym you mentioned, SPACE, and do you think investing in a Starlink system kind of model would make sense? Because basically when we talk about an alternative for the Wi-Fi and stuff, I feel like we're asking so much of people to get off cloud, to get off everything. And wouldn't it make sense on a state level to invest in something like, Starlink? And also, I think the keyword you mentioned when we think of alternative is the word commercialize, and how can we commercialize something on an individual level? And so when we think of something like a radio or like car phones and stuff, do you think it makes sense to think on a neighborhood level rather than an individual level, meaning like have some sort of emergency kind of room in every neighborhood that would serve the entire neighborhood rather than, for example, asking individuals to invest in like, batteries on a household level. So yeah, and also I have also another question, if that's okay, really quick one for Golzar, which is I'm curious because I work in kind of sustainability and communicating a little bit about climate change. I'm curious why still like local authorities are still not that present when it comes to, for example, to communicating on like climate change and stuff, like on like in forums like Reels and like TikTok and stuff like that. I know there's some sort of maybe reluctancy for different considerations. So I'm just curious about that. Thank you very much.
Come to you, Mike, first, and then
Okay, well, I'll take the question to myself first. But I've been thinking a fair bit about community resilience recently, hence the two hats. I mean, for some families, it might make sense to invest in a generator, in a Starlink terminal, in redundant cooking equipment, water storage. That seems to me to be slight overkill. And I think that's probably the kind of thing that is better done at community level. If you can get a group of people together, and it would be nice to see if this is done. And there are a couple of examples already in Cambridgeshire where this is being piloted. So St Ives, for example, under the auspices of the Local Resilience Forum, they're some way ahead of where we in Ely are on this, although we're doing slightly different things. But I have a vision of, if you get a group of interested people together, some kind of a community, if you start asking, you will find that the resources are already there. So we need a generator. Well, there's probably a builder somewhere who's got a generator that they use on site, and they're not going to be working in a major disaster. So why don't they agree to bring the generator along? If they need the generator, they'll probably want some fuel for it. So you get somebody else in the community who says, well, I've got a brick outhouse. I can keep a 20-gallon, a 20-litre jerry can of petrol there, and that will be available for the emergency. Somebody else will have a gas barbecue, which you could cook on. You might be able to persuade somebody else to keep a spare cylinder of gas. This is the kind of thing which at the community level may not even require investment. But it might be worth all clubbing together to get a Starlink terminal in the hope that you'll get useful internet in a blackout. These are the things that each community can decide for itself. But if you spread the cost across, say, 20 families, it becomes affordable, whereas it would probably be ridiculous for a single family. So that's the kind of thing that I would hopefully see spring up as we move on, if we do have a national conversation about this kind of thing, or even if people locally just decide to have the conversation themselves.
I'll refer you also to our last session, which has been recorded and will be online at some point so you can watch it. So this is the idea of neighborhood power generation. Right? So it's a new initiative that's coming up. And the idea is that like a street could band together, get solar panels, get batteries, and provide a power for their street. You could imagine that also includes communication systems for their street. And it's also a good excuse to talk to your neighbors.
Wonderful, thank you. And we'll come to Golzar next.
So thank you very much. Actually, that's the idea that we're looking at the moment into. And I can speak for the department I'm working in. And we have realized with just working with people, we did some post occupation evaluations, looking at the map, just as an example, the way people use their homes after they occupy them, and just finding out how many of these people are reading those manuals and how many of them actually find out how to use the features based on that manual. So we moved into a number of the videos, just sectioned videos that people can just, somebody will explain that to people with some in the videos, and people can click on specific items to get that information because they might be lengthy and they don't want to watch it all. So I do get what you mean and the power that is in that sort of communication, and we're now working more towards that. And we're even thinking of some sort of the video communications throughout the consultation as well. So that's something, watch the space, that might come up soon. Thank you.
And I believe we said we would come here as a last question, and then if you can keep it really quick, then we can come to you, and then we can pass back to Helen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm from the United States originally. I grew up in a small rural area of Wisconsin where I knew many people which were engaged in kind of what was called at the time a survivalist subculture, okay, where people worried about stuff like this. The problem is those subcultures have evolved into extreme right-wing organizations now. So if you go to the United States and you talk about this kind of thing, emergency, people will react probably negatively because it's so closely associated with militant, these militias, Proud Boys, all of this has become very, very politicized in the United States. So I'm wondering, is that the same thing here? Is there a problem like that here?
In speaking to people who are vaguely interested in this, I think there's the tinfoil hat brigade who are the preppers who think that when the lights go out, they can head to the hills and live off squirrels in a tent. I'm not one of that kind. I think if you talk to the average concerned citizen, you'll get either you're mad or I'm really glad you asked me about that. So I don't think we've yet split along those lines, and long may it continue like that.
Good to hear, because I'm glad to see that some of this extremism hasn't crossed the Atlantic.
And before we come to say, as part of the reason we're doing this series, we thought communications is a top one, is because if we don't have a public conversation about it, people take it into their own hands. So we're really glad that we're having this conversation, and please do continue it with your families, friends, and with us, and engage with us. We'll come to you if you can keep it quick, and we'll pass back to Helen. Thank you.
Definitely, thank you. No, since we are talking about money and politics, I just think whenever money is short, I think resilience goes first, because why would you pay for something that you don't need right now? And I mean, I see that at work, you don't order spare parts because you don't have the money now, but then something breaks and the machine sits there for a while and you can't use it. I mean, I guess it's just, often about money. Lots of the things people ask for have to be paid for. And I think the way to put pressure on politicians is, I mean, it just has to be clear that this is what the public wants, rather than stop the boats and stuff. It has to be the priority of the public, and then politicians will listen and potentially spend the money. Then we also have to accept that the money won't go elsewhere. But it might also be needed. So,
thank you. That's very helpful. Before we hand back, I've got one thing to say, which I've talked a bit about with Mike and others in the past that I think is relevant to here, is one way to service those sorts of elements where they're not being used until emergency, and then of course cost-cutting means they get rejected, is to make sure that those things are used in various skill sessions. So, for example, scouts and guides can be quite a helpful way to give excuses to do those things. Or we were talking about local community resilience, is can you get things which service a interest in skill, which when an emergency becomes very relevant. Ham radio is a good example of that. But then are there other examples where you can train skills up, maybe rather than younger people always necessarily just talking about social media from an influencer point of view, is there an element there about actually what happens to social media or what happens to the internet when those things go down as part of those courses can be a helpful exercise, because they're going to be interested in those things anyway, and you can slip it in that way, as it were, which is a helpful thought here on how to make things more resilient, is use those things even though they are also backups. With that, I will hand over to Helen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. So if you have questions that we were not able to get to this evening, there's some paper up here and some pens. Please write them down. Questions will be included in the report and we'll get answers for you. Our last item is that our designated listener tonight has been Peter Pope. So please take 2 minutes to give us a summary of what's been discussed here today.
Thank you, Helen. Well, it's quite a challenge to try and summarize everything we've gone through this evening. But the subjects are broken down into technology on the one hand, and community on the other. Technology is what I expected to come out, because we all have these things in our pockets these days. But what we've learned is that these systems can be very vulnerable. Market forces may deliver us fancy, sophisticated devices, but they don't deliver resilience. So we're lacking in diversity and redundancy in our systems. And when it comes to emergency planning, we learned that we are in this country behind Scandinavian countries in making people prepared. And it's also been pointed out that in difficult times, people can panic. So we're not necessarily making sensible decisions. That's something that perhaps our community can deal with if we are pre-prepared. So on the one hand, we might have runners ready to go from Cambridge to Huntingdon to carry messages. But the main thing that we need is to be able to trust our neighbours and trust the communications that we're receiving. Really, just to summarise the range of discussions we've had, the runners going to Huntingdon is the one extreme, and the other extreme is the notion that we are all dependent on technical systems that measure time in nanoseconds. And that's something I'm going to take away with me this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Peter. So thanks again to our speakers. Thank you to the counselors for being here. Thank you to all the volunteers who have helped make this happen. So easy. Thank you, Liz, helping out earlier, and Charlie. And thank you to Katie Thornborough also, who is not able to be here tonight, but has been coordinating with the council. Thank you to the council for letting us have this space for free. So just to answer your question, so I and Charlie represent the Resilience Web. So our group, in collaboration with the Cambridge Room, of which Katie Thornborough is a trustee. She's also a city councillor. And so us together have put on this event kind of in collaboration together. So after tonight, I will send out a link to the recording. Feel free to share that with your networks. As I briefly mentioned earlier, our next event on April 8th is going to be on community. So we'll be talking about a lot of the same themes. Please take some of the flyers that we have around and distribute those as well. So, talk about all these things. Okay, so this event basically has been produced on no budget. So if you would like to make a donation, it would be gratefully received to help fund our advertising. So donations can be placed in the basket, and there's also a QR code where you can make a donation online if you don't have cash. Following on from this series, we would love to host a more in-depth series of workshops on solutions. We've talked a lot about the problems, but we'd like to do a deep dive into solutions. And to do that, we would also need funding. So if you would be interested in that work in any way, please talk to me or Charlie after the meeting. So thank you all for coming. Please take the flyers with you. And please continue any conversations we're having on the balcony just outside so that the staff who are staying late for us here can clean up the space. So thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you to those online. You can drop off now. Cheers.